Picture this. You're sitting across from a 95-year-old woman wearing a coat that's seen more winters than most hedge fund managers have seen quarterly reports. She orders the cheapest item on the menu, uses a coupon without hesitation, and drives a car that could qualify for antique status. You'd never guess she's worth over $2 billion. Has this ever happened to you? Meeting someone whose wealth is completely invisible, hidden beneath layers of deliberate simplicity? These are the people Munger studied obsessively because they understood something most of us miss entirely about what to do with money after 60. Here's where it gets fascinating. Munger discovered that financial discipline isn't really about education. It's about temperament, about something deeper that's wired into who we are from birth. You can take two siblings raised in the exact same household, given identical financial education, and one will become a compulsive saver while the other burns. Through money, like it's a competitive sport. The difference isn't knowledge, it's nature. And if you're over 60 right now, this realization should fundamentally change how you think about your cash reserves and investment strategy. Have you ever wondered why some people seem born to build wealth, while others, no matter how many financial books they read or seminars they attend, can't seem to hold on to a dollar? It's a question that haunted Charlie Munger for decades, and after raising 8 children and observing thousands of investors, he came to a startling conclusion that challenges everything we've been taught about money management, especially after age 60, when the stakes become critically high and time becomes your scarcest resource. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth that Munger witnessed repeatedly throughout his 9 decades of life. The first generation builds wealth through discipline and patience, sacrificing today's pleasures for tomorrow's security. But then something tragic happens. The second generation, and especially the third, mistakes inherited wealth for personal genius. They show up wearing diamond watches and driving vintage cars, convinced they're clever because they can afford expensive old things, never realizing they're simply spending down the prudence of someone long dead. Capitalism, Munger observed, rewards good genes just as much as good judgment, and it punishes both when you hand them to people who never learned the difference between wealth and income. This is precisely why holding cash after 60 can be one of the most dangerous financial mistakes you'll ever make. Yet most people do it anyway, thinking they're being safe and conservative. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might completely transform how you view your retirement strategy and the legacy you're building, or accidentally destroying. The answer isn't in saving more aggressively or cutting every pleasure from your life. It's in understanding a fundamental principle about productive assets, compound growth, and the critical difference between hoarding money and multiplying it intelligently during the years when it matters most. Because here's what nobody tells you about turning 60. You've probably spent your entire life believing that rationality is something you can learn from a book or a weekend seminar. You read about compound interest. You understand the mathematics of delayed gratification. You can quote Warren Buffett in your sleep. But then you still check your portfolio obsessively, panic when markets dip, and secretly wonder if that hot stock tip from your neighbor might be worth a gamble. The hidden truth is that rationality isn't information you download into your brain once and you're done. It's a daily practice, a transformation of behavior that most people never actually complete because knowing what to do and consistently doing it are separated by the widest canyon in human psychology. Munger had a brutally honest answer when people asked him for the secret to building wealth. He'd look them straight in the eye and say, "Don't be stupid." That's it. No complex formulas, no secret strategies, no insider knowledge. Just don't be stupid. But here's the revelation that makes this advice so uncomfortable. Most people literally cannot help being stupid with money. We're biologically hardwired for immediate gratification because our ancestors needed to eat the berry today, not save it for next winter. The idea of waiting a decade for a financial payoff triggers actual physical discomfort in the human brain, and Wall Street knows this intimately. That's why they're constantly selling action, movement, excitement, packaging dopamine hits as investment opportunities. They're not in the business of making you rich. They're in the business of making you feel like something is happening. Now, I want to go even deeper into this mindset shift because what Munger and Buffett did with Berkshire Hathaway was revolutionary in its simplicity. They built an entire investment vehicle specifically designed for people who don't need constant stimulation, for investors whose temperament naturally leans toward patience rather than those trying to learn patience through willpower alone. Their shareholder base isn't filled with day traders frantically clicking refresh on their screens. It's populated by people who would genuinely rather watch paint dry than chase the latest bubble or trend. And this is where the real competitive advantage reveals itself. When everyone around you is making emotional decisions driven by fear or greed, your ability to simply sit still and think clearly becomes a form of arbitrage, a way to profit from other people's psychological chaos without lifting a finger. This is the journey most people over 60 never take because they confuse activity with progress and movement with strategy. Write in the comments, "Patience is my advantage," if this is starting to click for you. But here's where this whole journey takes an unexpected turn, and it's something Munger witnessed over and over throughout his life, a phenomenon he called financial anorexia. Just as patience can be your greatest asset, it can also become a pathology when taken to extremes. There are people who save so aggressively, so obsessively, that they literally forget how to live. They hoard joy the same way misers hoard coins, always postponing, always waiting for some perfect future moment that never arrives. This isn't prudence, it's a disease. If you reach 85 with millions in the bank but zero memories worth, cherishing you haven't won at life. You've simply donated your entire existence to a spreadsheet, letting compound interest grow while your capacity for joy withered away unused. The revelation here is that there's a massive difference between being disciplined and being imprisoned by your own fear. Munger himself followed a surprisingly simple ratio. He spent 2 or 3 cents out of every dollar he earned and saved the rest. That formula worked for him not because of the exact percentages, but because he understood something most people miss entirely. The real trick isn't about how much you save. It's about how little you actually need to feel content. When your expectations are reasonable, when you're not constantly comparing yourself to neighbors or Instagram influencers, the entire world suddenly looks affordable. This mindset creates something invaluable. It gives you both financial security and psychological peace simultaneously, which is the real wealth that most people chase their entire lives without ever catching. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth about human psychology that explains why so many people fail at this after 60. We evolved as hunters, as doers, as creatures who needed constant movement to survive. Our ancestors didn't sit still. They tracked prey, gathered resources, stayed active or died. That evolutionary wiring is still inside you, which is why sitting on cash or holding a stock for 10 years without touching it feels like psychological torture. It doesn't feel like strategy. It feels like death. This is the hidden battle happening inside every investor's mind. The primal craving for action, for movement, for the feeling that something is happening, even when that movement is financially destructive. Most people would genuinely rather feel busy losing money than feel lazy making it, which seems absurd until you realize we're not rational calculators. We're emotional animals wearing business suits. Wall Street understands this. biological reality better than you do, which is why they've built an entire industry around feeding your need for stimulation. Every notification, every breaking news alert, every hot tip is designed to trigger that ancient hunting instinct, making you feel like you need to act immediately or miss out forever. The impact of this manipulation is devastating for people over 60 who should be in their wealth preservation phase, but instead find themselves trading frantically, chasing returns and sabotaging decades of disciplined saving because sitting still feels unbearable. This is where the real transformation needs to happen, not in learning more information, but in rewiring your relationship with inactivity, recognizing that sometimes the most profitable decision is the one you don't make. Write in the comments, "I choose clarity over chaos," if you're ready to break this cycle. If this resonates with you, hit subscribe. This channel is for people who want real wisdom, not recycled platitudes, practical insights you can actually use. This pattern repeats itself with almost comedic precision throughout financial history, yet each generation believes their distraction is somehow different, somehow special. In the late 90s, it was dot-com stocks that would change everything. Then came real estate bubbles, then cryptocurrencies promising to revolutionize money itself, then meme stocks turning the market into a social media game. The technology evolves, the packaging gets more sophisticated, the promises sound more convincing, but the underlying psychology remains absolutely identical. It's always the same ancient human need for stimulation dressed up in modern clothing. You can replace physical roulette tables with algorithmic trading platforms, swap casino chips for digital tokens, but the impulse driving both is exactly the same. The desperate desire for something to happen, for action, for the feeling that you're not missing out on the next big thing. This is precisely why genuine patience will always be rare, why it will always carry a premium, and why most people over 60 squander their advantages by chasing whatever shiny object their era happens to be worshipping. But here's the revelation that Munger arrived at after decades of observation, and it's simultaneously liberating and brutal. Patience isn't really something you can teach yourself if you weren't born with at least some of it already. If you came into this world wired for impulsivity, you can definitely improve. You can build systems and structures to compensate, but you'll always be fighting against your own nature, and gravity usually wins that fight. The best investors Munger studied throughout his life weren't necessarily the ones with the highest IQs or the most advanced degrees. They were the calmest people in the room, the ones whose temperament didn't require constant validation from the market, from their peers, or from quarterly statements. They could watch everyone around them getting rich quickly on garbage investments and not feel even a twinge of envy or urgency. That's not a skill you learn from a book. That's a fundamental aspect of character. So here's the practical transformation that needs to happen in your thinking, especially after 60, when these patterns are deeply ingrained. If you're naturally impatient, and most people are, then at least have the self-awareness to acknowledge it and design your financial life around that reality. Automate everything you can. Set up systems that remove temptation. Stop pretending that one day you'll wake up transformed into Benjamin Graham just because you read the right book or watched enough YouTube videos. It's not going to happen. But if you're one of the rare individuals naturally wired for patience and prudence, then guard that temperament like it's the most valuable asset you own. Because the entire world, every advertisement, every financial product, every well-meaning friend will constantly try to talk you out of it. They'll make you feel boring, old-fashioned, like you're missing out on opportunities everyone else is capturing. The hidden truth behind the scenes is that those opportunities are usually just expensive lessons in disguise, and your boring patience is actually the most powerful competitive advantage you possess in a world addicted to movement. Put down, "I know my wiring," if you're being honest with yourself about which category you fall into. Understanding your wiring is just the first step, because here's what happens next on this journey, and this is where arithmetic becomes your greatest ally or your cruelest teacher. The patient few, the ones who actually implement what we're talking about, always look absolutely foolish in the beginning, while everyone around them is bragging about quick gains and showing off their trading profits. These quiet investors are sitting there looking boring, outdated, irrelevant. But then the noise eventually fades, the bubbles pop, the hot trends collapse, and suddenly those patient people are still standing while everyone else is frantically trying to recover losses. That elderly woman Munger loved to reference, the one with 4,000 Berkshire A shares worth billions, never chased trends, never needed applause from her friends, never felt compelled to prove anything to anyone. She simply let arithmetic do all the heavy lifting. And here's the beautiful revelation: arithmetic, unlike human emotion, never lies to you. It doesn't panic, it doesn't get greedy, it doesn't wake up one morning and decide to change the rules. 2 plus 2 will always equal 4, whether the market is euphoric or in free fall. But now we need to address something that causes immense damage to people over 60, and it's wrapped up in what has become almost a religious devotion to delayed gratification. Financial gurus preach it like it's a moral commandment, as if denying yourself today automatically creates a better tomorrow. The hidden problem is that most people practicing extreme delayed gratification don't actually understand what later means in practical terms. Later becomes someday, someday becomes next year becomes eventually, and eventually becomes never. Before you realize what's happened, the saver is gone, they die, and all that compounding stops permanently, not because the mathematics failed them, but because biology caught up first. The spreadsheet worked perfectly, but the human running it ran out of time. This is the transformation in thinking that's absolutely critical after 60. Patience must be balanced with actually living your life, not just optimizing it on paper. There's a massive difference between strategic delayed gratification and accidentally delaying your entire life. Munger witnessed this tragedy play out countless times. Brilliant savers who postponed every vacation, skipped every hobby that cost money, eliminated every small joy from their daily existence, all in the obsessive pursuit of maximizing future comfort. They spent decades optimizing spreadsheets while completely ignoring sunsets. They worshipped the mathematics of compounding, but somehow forgot about the mathematics of mortality, the simple calculation that your years are finite and declining. The impact of this mistake doesn't show up in your portfolio. It shows up in the relationships you never deepened, the experiences you never had, the memories you never created. You can have $10 million and still be bankrupt in the things that actually matter. This is why holding cash after 60 without a clear strategy for multiplying it through productive assets, while simultaneously funding a meaningful life, is such a dangerous trap. Write in the comments, "Balance is my strategy," if this resonates with where you are right now. If this shifted your perspective, click that like button. It helps this message reach others who need to hear. This balance becomes even more critical when you understand the actual mathematics behind what most people consider safe investing after 60. Buffett once did a calculation that should terrify anyone holding long-term bonds right now. If you buy a 30-year government bond paying 3% interest while inflation runs at 2%, and then the government takes its tax cut from your gains, you'll spend 3 decades delaying gratification just to break even. Think about that for a moment. 30 years of your life, 30 years of discipline and patience, and at the end, you have exactly the same purchasing power you started with. You'll ride the same number of rides at Disneyland that you could have ridden on day one. That's not financial wisdom. That's self-deception wearing a thrift store costume. The revelation here is that delayed gratification is only intelligent when the system you're operating in actually rewards delay. And right now, for people over 60, sitting on cash or bonds, that reward structure has fundamentally broken down. Munger used to tell his children something that sounded perfectly reasonable at the time. Eat hamburgers now so we can eat steak later. It was the classic delayed gratification pitch. Sacrifice small pleasures today for bigger rewards tomorrow. But here's the uncomfortable question that transforms this entire mindset. What happens if the steak never actually comes? What if you spend decades eating hamburgers, dutifully saving and sacrificing, and then the economy shifts, your health deteriorates, or the government invents creative new ways to tax your patience into oblivion? Then all that purposeful saving transforms into nothing more than postponed disappointment. You didn't build wealth, you just delayed living until it was too late to enjoy what you'd accumulated. Now, let me take you deeper into why this matters so urgently right now, especially if you're over 60. Delayed gratification only functions as a winning strategy in economic systems that genuinely reward patience. But we're currently living in a low-interest environment that has turned traditional saving into an actual trap. When you park cash in a savings account or buy conservative bonds, you're not really saving for your future. You're subsidizing someone else's leverage. The banks take your money, pay you essentially nothing, then lend it out 10 times over to borrowers at much higher rates. From their perspective, your deposits are inventory, raw material they use to generate profits. From your perspective, you call it being responsible and safe. The hidden truth behind the scenes is that you're being systematically harvested. This is the impact of holding cash after 60 in today's environment. You're not preserving wealth. You're watching it slowly evaporate through inflation, while pretending the account balance staying the same means you're maintaining your purchasing power. Put down, "I see the trap now." If this perspective shift is landing for you, seeing the trap is the beginning of your transformation. But now comes the critical decision point that separates people who merely understand this problem from those who actually solve it. Here's the fundamental principle Munger lived by. You should be saving to buy freedom, not furniture. Not to accumulate more stuff, not to impress neighbors, not even to leave the biggest possible inheritance, but to purchase independence, to create options, to build a life where you're not controlled by financial anxiety. This changes everything about how you think about money after 60. You should only delay gratification when the reward genuinely exceeds the cost of waiting. Patience only pays when the mathematics actually agrees with your sacrifice. And right now, for most traditional savings vehicles, the math is screaming that you're on the wrong side of history. Let me show you exactly how insidious this has become. Inflation is the most polite thief you'll ever encounter, invisible, quiet, and absolutely relentless. It doesn't break into your house or threaten you. It just silently steals your purchasing power while you sleep, so gradually that you barely notice until years have passed. Here's the brutal arithmetic that most people over 60 don't fully calculate. If your savings account pays 3% interest while inflation runs at 2%, you might think you're earning a 1% real return. But that's before the tax collector shows up. The government doesn't tax your real return. They tax the nominal number, that full 3%. So after taxes, you're not earning anything. You're actually losing ground. You've practiced discipline, delayed gratification, done everything the financial advisors told you to do, and you've been quietly robbed for your trouble. The system rewarded your patience with purchasing power erosion. This revelation should fundamentally alter your strategy after 60, because saving isn't a virtue when it earns nothing meaningful. It's actually naive to keep storing cash in a system specifically designed to punish savers while rewarding borrowers and speculators. The hidden truth is that if you're going to delay gratification and invest for the future, you need to do it for something that actually compounds in real terms, not just on spreadsheets. This means shifting your mindset from preservation to intelligent multiplication. You need to own pieces of actual businesses, productive assets that generate real cash flow, companies that can raise prices alongside inflation and protect your purchasing power. Buying 30-year bonds at 3% isn't safety. It's a slow-motion guarantee of poverty. The transformation required here isn't about taking wild risks or becoming a speculator. It's about recognizing that what felt safe 30 years ago has become dangerous, and what feels slightly uncomfortable now, owning productive businesses, is actually the rational path forward. Write in the comments, productive assets, not promises, if you're ready to make this mental shift. Making that mental shift opens up an entirely new way of thinking, but it also exposes another dangerous psychological trap that catches people over 60, what I call the bias toward purity and excess. The human mind has this strange tendency to believe that if a little of something is good, then more must automatically be better. A little patience is valuable. Therefore, endless patience must be divine. A little saving is smart. Therefore, saving every possible penny must be genius. This distorted thinking leads people to refuse enjoying any part of life until their portfolio hits some arbitrary milestone. $1 million, 2 million, whatever number they've convinced themselves represents enough. But here's what actually happens. They finally reach that number, feel anxious for about 48 hours, then immediately move the goalpost. Now, they need 3 million to feel secure. They've become addicted to someday, and someday is the most dangerous word in the entire financial vocabulary because it steals your present moments in tiny, imperceptible increments that you'll never get back. This is where people completely misunderstand what Munger meant by rational living. When he talked about discipline and rationality, most people automatically assumed he was advocating for joyless existence, for grinding self-denial and monastic sacrifice. That's completely wrong. Munger genuinely enjoyed good meals, valued smart conversations, appreciated quiet afternoons. He experienced all of these things regularly, just within reasonable boundaries. The transformation in his thinking came from a simple recognition. He didn't pretend to have infinite tomorrows. After burying enough friends, attending enough funerals, watching enough brilliant people vanish unexpectedly, he understood with absolute clarity that tomorrows are finite and they're declining. This awareness didn't make him reckless, it made him intentional. There's a massive difference between wasting money and investing it in experiences that compound your quality of life. Now, here's one of life's funniest and most painful paradoxes that directly impacts how you should think about cash after 60. Most people genuinely believe happiness is somewhere out in the future, patiently waiting for them to finally arrive after they've saved enough or achieved enough. But happiness doesn't work that way. Happiness operates exactly like compound interest. It only grows when you regularly reinvest it. If you defer happiness indefinitely, postponing joy until some perfect future moment, it doesn't accumulate in an account somewhere waiting for you. It expires. The capacity for joy itself atrophies from lack of use. This is the hidden truth behind so many unhappy wealthy people. They spent decades training themselves not to enjoy things, and by the time they had the money to enjoy everything, they'd lost the ability to feel satisfaction. So yes, absolutely save for the future and multiply your assets intelligently, but also buy the ice cream when you want it, take your grandchildren to the movies, sit with your spouse watching sunsets instead of reading another financial forecast. That's not indulgence, that's maintenance of your humanity. Put down, joy is also an investment if this is shifting how you think about the balance between saving and living. Recognizing that joy itself is an investment fundamentally changes the entire equation of what you're trying to accomplish after 60. Because here's the revelation most people miss completely. The goal was never to die rich. That's a meaningless achievement, a high score in a game that ends when you do. The real goal is to live wisely, which means developing the judgment to know when enough is actually enough. Delayed gratification is just a tool. It's incredibly useful in moderation, but it becomes deadly when taken to extremes. The right kind of delay builds freedom and options. The wrong kind builds a lifetime of regret, wrapped in a portfolio statement that impresses nobody at your funeral. This is the transformation in mindset that separates people who accumulate wealth from people who actually use it intelligently to fund meaningful lives. But there's another form of compounding that nobody talks about in financial planning seminars, and it works in the exact opposite direction. Of your investment returns, time compounds too, but not in your favor. You don't get stronger as years pass, you get weaker. Your energy doesn't increase, it declines. Your curiosity doesn't expand, it shrinks. Your physical capabilities don't improve, they deteriorate. And suddenly all those things you spent decades saving for, all those experiences you postponed until you could afford them properly, they stop feeling worth the effort. You might finally have enough money to afford the fancy steak, dinner you promised yourself, but now you've also got the cholesterol problems, the dietary restrictions, and the medical bills that come with aging. The cruel mathematics of human biology don't care about your investment strategy. This is why there's a critical window in life when experiences still taste good, when joy still registers as vivid and meaningful rather than just expensive and exhausting. Miss that window through excessive delay, and no amount of money will ever reopen it. This isn't pessimism, it's reality. You cannot buy back youth. You cannot purchase health that's already declined. You cannot recreate the genuine curiosity and wonder you had at 50 once you're 80, no matter how many zeros are in your account, not with all the compounding in the world. The hidden truth behind the scenes is that holding cash after 60 without actively deploying it into both productive assets and meaningful experiences is essentially betting that you'll have more energy, more health, and more capacity for joy 10 years from now than you do today. That's a bet you will lose. The impact of this realization should shake how you think about every dollar you're sitting on right now, because the decision isn't just financial, it's existential. Write in the comments, time is my scarcest asset, if this is crystallizing for you. Understanding that time is your scarcest asset should fundamentally reshape every financial decision you make from this point forward. And Munger witnessed this lesson play out in the most heartbreaking ways imaginable. He once met a man who embodied extreme discipline, someone who saved every single penny, hadn't taken a vacation in 20 years, constantly postponing any form of enjoyment because he was building toward this grand vision of retirement where he'd finally see the world and live properly. That was the plan, the dream he'd sacrificed decades to achieve. Then a few years later, his health collapsed. All that accumulated money sat there, completely useless, because he no longer had the physical capacity to spend it the way he'd imagined. The trips he'd delayed were now impossible. The adventures he'd postponed were medically inadvisable. The life he'd been saving for had evaporated before he could claim it. This is when Munger's perspective shifted completely. Sometimes a simple hamburger eaten with good company today genuinely beats a fancy steak dinner eaten alone 30 years later, assuming you even make it to that dinner. This brings us to a critical transformation in how you need to think about money after 60. Yes, absolutely spend less than you earn. That's foundational, non-negotiable wisdom. But don't make a religion out of saving. Don't turn your bank balance into a moral scoreboard where higher numbers equal superior virtue. Money is a tool, and tools are meant to be used intelligently to enhance your actual life, not replace it. Some people treat their savings account like it's a spiritual achievement, as if every dollar saved makes them a better person. That's not prudence, that's confusion about what wealth is actually for. Real prudence includes the wisdom to know when spending is the rational decision and what's worth spending on. Being financially disciplined doesn't mean being joyless. It means being intentional about where your resources go and ensuring they're actually improving your existence rather than just decorating a spreadsheet. Here's the brutal honesty you need to hear. Real wealth isn't about the size of your account balance. Real wealth is the ability to spend without anxiety, to make decisions based on what enhances your life rather than what preserves every penny. If you still experience panic or guilt every time you open your wallet, even with substantial savings, then you're not actually rich. You're just a hoarder who happens to have bigger numbers. The transformation required here is understanding what you're buying with your money. Make absolutely certain you're purchasing experiences that enrich your life, not ego symbols that impress strangers who don't care about you. One genuinely enriches you and creates lasting value. The other just decorates your insecurity and proves you still don't understand the game. Put down, "I'm buying freedom, not status," if you're clear on this distinction now. Being clear on that distinction is liberating, but it also reveals another layer of wisdom that took Munger decades to fully understand. He didn't become wealthy by worshipping frugality like some kind of financial deity. He became wealthy by respecting frugality while simultaneously understanding its natural limits. Frugality is fantastic for building initial capital, for creating that foundation of financial security. But perspective is what keeps you sane once you have that foundation. Munger witnessed billionaires who literally could not enjoy a simple meal because they were mentally calculating cost per calorie efficiency, turning dinner into an optimization problem. That's not intelligence or discipline. That's a mental disorder that happens to come with a spreadsheet attached. When frugality stops being a tool and becomes your entire identity, you've crossed from rational behavior into pathology. This connects directly to one of the most important revelations about wealth that most people discover too late. If you're genuinely unhappy earning $50,000 a year, you will still be unhappy earning 50 million. Happiness doesn't scale linearly with money. That's the hidden truth nobody wants to acknowledge because it undermines the entire fantasy we've built around wealth. Yes, security increases as your assets grow, and that security matters enormously. But contentment, that deep sense of satisfaction with your life, it plateaus remarkably early. After you've covered basic needs and achieved reasonable comfort, the joy curve flattens dramatically. Beyond a few $1,000,000, additional wealth often creates negative returns on happiness because you transition from enjoying possessions to managing them. You spend more time worried about protecting what you have than actually benefiting from it. Now let me take you even deeper into this mindset transformation, because there's a fundamental misunderstanding most people carry about what money actually does. Money doesn't transform your character. It amplifies whatever character you already possess. If you're insecure now, more money will make you more insecure, not less. If you're arrogant, wealth gives you a bigger microphone to broadcast that arrogance. If you're generous and thoughtful, money scales your positive impact. But the core of who you are remains unchanged. This is why Munger watched so many billionaires implode in slow motion, destroying relationships and their own peace of mind, because they'd spent their entire journey believing that money would cure their underlying unhappiness. It never did. It just gave them more resources to express and magnify their existing problems. The impact of this realization should be profound. Chasing wealth to fix internal issues is like trying to solve an emotional problem with a financial calculator. It cannot work. Write in the comments, character first, capital second, if this principle is landing with you. Understanding that character comes before capital leads to another uncomfortable revelation about what happens when you actually accumulate significant wealth without the wisdom to handle it properly. Munger identified something he called the disease of abundance, and it's more widespread than most people realize. When you have too much of everything, your brain starts inventing problems to stay occupied. Suddenly, the private jet isn't fast enough, the chef slightly overcooked the caviar, the yacht needs upgrading even though it's practically new. This isn't dissatisfaction with real problems, it's boredom masquerading as legitimate concerns. You keep frantically upgrading your lifestyle, constantly chasing the next level of luxury, because somewhere along the journey you completely forgot how to upgrade your mind. You stop growing internally, so you compensate by expanding externally, surrounding yourself with increasingly expensive distractions that never actually satisfy the deeper emptiness. This is where the real transformation in thinking happens, and it's exactly the opposite of what most financial content teaches you. The secret to genuine happiness isn't accumulation, it's elimination. This sounds counterintuitive in a culture obsessed with more. But stay with me because this changes everything about how you should think about money after 60. Real happiness comes from eliminating envy, removing the constant comparison with others, destroying the pervasive illusion that acquiring more will somehow fix the feeling of having less. Happiness is fundamentally about subtraction, not addition. When you remove the noise, the endless marketing messages, the social media comparison games, the pressure to keep up with people you don't even like, you suddenly discover what every billionaire is still desperately searching for: a genuinely quiet mind. That mental peace, that absence of internal chaos, is worth more than any number in any account. This principle of deliberate simplicity is exactly what made Berkshire Hathaway so extraordinarily successful while remaining almost boringly simple in structure. Munger and Buffett built the entire organization with one primary goal: avoid stupidity longer than other people can maintain discipline. They didn't create layers of bureaucracy, committees endlessly discussing trivial matters, or strategic planning departments generating impressive presentations that nobody reads. Their investment philosophy is almost offensively boring to most modern investors, and that's precisely why it works so effectively. They understood that bureaucracy destroys performance, that complexity creates hiding places for incompetence, so they simply skipped all of that entirely. The hidden truth behind the scenes is that this same principle applies to your personal finances after 60. The simpler your structure, the fewer moving parts you have, the less likely you are to sabotage yourself through unnecessary complexity. Put down, "Simplicity is my strategy," if you're seeing how this applies to your own situation right now. Seeing simplicity as your strategy naturally leads to understanding another invisible asset that compounds just as powerfully as money, but takes even longer to build: your reputation. In business and in life, trust operates exactly like compound interest. You don't notice it accumulating day by day, but over decades it becomes an unstoppable force that opens doors no amount of money can unlock. When you consistently make good decisions, when you do what you promise without drama or excuses, eventually people stop questioning whether you'll behave responsibly. They just assume you won't act like a jackass. That assumption, that automatic trust, is worth more than any marketing campaign you could ever fund. This is why people over 60 who've built solid reputations have such an enormous advantage. They've spent decades depositing credibility that they can now withdraw when opportunities arise. This brings us to one of the most practical applications of everything we've discussed: And it's exactly how Berkshire approached the 2008 financial crisis and every market panic before and after. Their secret weapon wasn't luck or genius. It was liquidity, combined with psychological composure. When everyone else was selling in absolute terror, Berkshire had cash reserves and the emotional fortitude to deploy them intelligently. That's not heroism or reckless courage. That's preparation meeting panic. They held cash, not because they fetishized safety, but because they understood it as firepower, ammunition waiting for the moment. When fear creates genuine opportunities, this is the transformation you need to make in thinking about cash after 60. It shouldn't just sit there, eroding through inflation. It should be strategic reserves ready to multiply when everyone else loses their minds. Now let me show you the other side of this equation, because understanding what not to do is just as valuable as knowing what to do. Munger watched the Bitcoin phenomenon with fascination, not as a potential investment, but as a psychological experiment that revealed something fundamental about human nature. Here's a digital token with zero intrinsic value, producing nothing, generating no cash flow, yet somehow commanding trillions of dollars in collective faith. That's not finance. That's mass hypnosis. It proves that humans desperately prefer magical thinking over arithmetic, prefer exciting stories over boring mathematics. Like every hypnosis act throughout history, the magic eventually ends the moment enough people wake up and ask what they're actually holding. But here's where all of this comes together into something actionable and deeply practical. After 9 decades of living, investing, and observing, Munger arrived at a simple conclusion. The goal was never to be rich. The goal is to stay rational long enough to live well. Rational joy means being genuinely content without sliding into complacency. It means being disciplined without becoming dull and joyless. It means being generous without being gullible to every sob story or investment pitch. This is the middle path between reckless excess and paralyzing fear, and it's the only approach that actually scales with age. Peace of mind, that quiet confidence that you've made good decisions and lived intentionally. That's what money was supposed to buy all along. Write in the comments, peace is the real wealth, if this entire journey is crystallizing into clarity for you. If you've made it this far, you're clearly not someone satisfied with surface-level financial advice or quick-fix promises. You're thinking deeper about what money actually means after 60. About how to multiply it intelligently while still living a life worth remembering. That's exactly the kind of mindset we explore in every video on this channel, cutting through the noise, challenging conventional wisdom, and focusing on what actually works in the real world, rather than what sounds good in theory. If this resonated with you, if you found yourself nodding along, or rethinking assumptions you've carried for years, then subscribing makes sense. This isn't about collecting numbers. It's about building a community of people who value clarity over hype, rationality over emotion, and substance over entertainment. Every video here is designed to give you practical wisdom you can actually use, not just feel-good platitudes that evaporate 5 minutes after watching. And if you're still with me right now, drop a comment saying, "Peace is the real wealth." It lets me know you made it to the end, and that this message landed the way it was intended. Your engagement genuinely helps this content reach other people who need to hear it. People who are sitting on cash after 60, wondering if there's a better way forward. Hit that like button too, because it tells the algorithm that this kind of in-depth, honest conversation is worth promoting over the typical financial noise flooding the internet. And look, there's a video right here that takes this even further. It digs into exactly how to identify productive assets that actually multiply your wealth instead of just preserving it. Click and continue with me over there. Let's keep this transformation going.